She thought the janitor would steal a look, not a secret. At 11:40 p.m., with midtown rain ticking against the concrete ceiling of the underground garage, Vivienne Cross let her head rest against the leather seat and kept her breathing slow and even. Her driver had been dismissed. Her assistant had gone upstairs to fix a last-minute disaster for tomorrow night's gala, and the black company limo sat alone in a pool of fluorescent light, like a stage waiting for one wrong move. Vivienne had built Cross Meridian by trusting numbers, leverage, timing, and exactly no one she could not verify. Tonight, she wanted to verify the night janitor. Owen Hale, 38. Clean record. Clockwork attendance. No office politics. No chatter. In a building full of people who performed loyalty for promotions, he was invisible enough to be dangerous. She heard the rear door open, then the soft scrape of a mop bucket while rolling past. No pause. No sharp inhale. No rustle of a man spotting a sleeping CEO and suddenly imagining a shortcut to a better life. Just quiet footsteps. Measured. Controlled. Then stillness. Vivienne kept her eyes shut. She had left her tablet on the seat beside her on purpose, screen dark, filled with merger files worth more than most people made in 10 lifetimes. Nothing happened. A second later, she felt the air shift. A faint smell of detergent, cold night air, and something warmer, like clean cotton dried in an apartment laundry room. Then a sweater. No, not a sweater, a small cardigan, soft with wear and carrying the sweet trace of a child's shampoo, settled carefully over her shoulders. The man adjusted at once, making sure it covered her throat. No tremor in his hands. No hesitation. Just a kind of practiced gentleness that hit harder than greed ever could. Then he leaned close enough for his voice to reach only her. "I couldn't save Daniel," he whispered. "I won't fail your family twice." Every muscle in Vivienne's body locked under the cardigan. Daniel was her husband. Dead 3 years. Buried with half his truth. No one in the company knew the last details of that night. No one. Her pulse hammered, but she did not move. Owen stepped back, as if the sentence had cost him more than a confession should. The rear door shut softly. The garage went quiet again. And for the first time in years, Vivienne Cross lay perfectly still, not because she was testing a man beneath her station, but because she was suddenly afraid that the most invisible man in her building knew exactly where the past had been buried. By 6:10 the next morning, the rain had cleared, and the glass skin of Cross Meridian caught the first pale strip of Manhattan daylight, like nothing strange had happened beneath it. But Vivienne Cross had not slept for even 10 minutes. She stood in her office with her blazer folded over the back of a chair, Daniel's name still moving through her head like a locked door someone had opened from the inside. On the wall monitor, security footage rolled in clean, silent loops. Owen Hale entered the underground garage at 11:39 p.m., pushing a gray janitor cart with a bent left wheel. He never once looked at the tablet she had left beside her. He did not touch her purse. He did not scan the cabin like a man searching for advantage. He noticed only 2 things, that she was cold, and that she was alone. That should have made him ordinary. It did not. Vivienne watched him fold the small cardigan from his supply bag with absurd care before placing it over her shoulders. A child's cardigan. Navy blue. One missing button. The kind of detail a woman noticed when she had spent years learning that people always revealed themselves in what they handled gently. She paused the footage and zoomed in on the cardigan cuff. Tiny silver embroidery. SH. So he had brought his daughter to work again. 10 minutes later, her chief of staff walked in with overnight reports, but Vivienne barely heard him. She asked for Owen's file instead. It arrived in under 60 seconds. Owen Hale, 38. Widower. 1 daughter, Sadie, age 9. Former facilities responder, then freelance maintenance, then night janitor. No complaints. No disciplinary flags. No college degree. No visible reason to know the name Daniel Cross. That was what unsettled her most. There were men in her world who lied because they wanted money. Men who lied because they wanted power. Owen looked like the far more dangerous kind. A man who carried truth quietly and had learned not to waste it on people who would not listen. At 7:02 a.m., another item hit her inbox. Internal maintenance note. Filed at 1:13 a.m. by Owen Hale. Subject line, temporary gala structure airflow conflict. She opened it. The language was plain, but precise. The smoke extraction setup in the grand atrium would reverse under sealed roof conditions. The decorative ceiling mesh was installed too close to the lighting truss. The drone demonstration should not be tested in that volume of enclosed air. 3 warnings. Specific. Technical. Calm. At the bottom, one final line stopped her cold in a completely different way. I already told floor operations once. They said a janitor should stop acting like he can read a building better than the people who designed it. Vivienne read that sentence twice, then looked back at the paused image of the little blue cardigan on her screen. Somewhere downstairs, a man everyone had learned to ignore had tried to warn her building before sunrise. And for reasons she could not yet prove, he had whispered to her like he was keeping a promise to the dead. At 7:25 a.m., Vivienne Cross left her office for the first time without an assistant, without a schedule, and without the protective certainty that usually moved ahead of her like a second body. The executive floor was already filling with glass door meetings, polished shoes, and the low mechanical rhythm of people preparing to sell confidence by the hour, but Vivienne moved past all of it and took the service elevator down. She did not go to facilities because that would have announced intent. She went to the loading corridor outside the freight bay, where the building always smelled faintly of cardboard, floor cleaner, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a hot plate. Owen Hale was there, kneeling beside a gray utility cart with a screwdriver in one hand, fixing the left while she had seen wobbling on the security feed. He looked up when the elevator opened, not startled, not eager, just aware in the way certain men were aware of weather before it changed. For one strange second, Vivienne understood why his silence felt more unsettling than anyone else's explanation. He stood, wiped his hands on a folded cloth, and nodded once. "Ma'am." That was it. No performance. No mention of the limo. No flicker that said he expected gratitude, fear, or leverage. Vivienne hated that this made him harder to read. "You filed a maintenance warning at 1:13, she said. "Yes." "And you brought it to floor operations before that." "Yes." "Why did you not escalate it further?" Owen glanced past her toward the open loading dock where a delivery truck was backing in, its reverse alarm beeping in patient little bursts. "Because I like feeding my daughter on time," he said. The answer landed with no bitterness at all, which somehow made it heavier. Vivienne held his gaze. "How do you know Daniel's name?" For the first time, something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not panic, just a controlled stillness, as if the question had been waiting for him longer than she had. "That is not the first question you should be asking," he said quietly. Vivienne almost laughed from pure disbelief. People did not redirect her in her own building. "Then tell me what the first question is." Owen picked up a clipboard from his cart, turned it toward her, and tapped a hand-drawn airflow sketch in neat block lines. "The first question is why your atrium vents are configured to trap heat above the stage if the roof seals during the gala. The second is why the decorative mesh over your lighting truss is rated for looks instead of temperature. And the third is why the drone company signed a waiver before a full enclosed space test." Vivienne looked down at the drawing. It was simple, almost plain, but exact. The path of air, the choke point, the build-up zone. He had mapped the room like he could hear the building breathe. "Who taught you to read systems like this?" she asked. Owen took the clipboard back. "Experience. That is not an answer. It is the one I can afford." Before she could press harder, a small voice floated down the corridor. "Dad." Vivienne turned. A little girl stood near the vending machines in a navy school sweater, violin case hanging from one shoulder, dark blonde hair pulled into a ponytail that was already slipping loose on one side. She could not have been older than 9. "Sadie." She looked from Owen to Vivienne with the open caution of a child who had learned adults came with consequences. Owen's whole posture changed at once. Not softer exactly, more anchored. He crossed to her, took the violin case before it slid off her shoulder, and crouched enough to straighten the collar of her sweater. "You ate breakfast?" he asked. "Half the muffin. The other half." She made a face, then noticed Vivienne still standing there. "Are you the lady from the car?" she asked. The question hit the air like a dropped glass. Owen's eyes closed for the briefest moment. Vivienne looked at the child, then back at the man who had covered her with a cardigan instead of touching a tablet full of secrets. "Yes," she said. Sadie nodded as if she had solved a private equation. "I knew it," she said. "You look like the person Dad was worried about." By 8:10 a.m., Vivienne Cross was back on the executive floor, but the building no longer felt like a machine she owned. It felt like something larger, layered with voices she had not bothered to hear until one of them had whispered her dead husband's name in the dark. She told herself she was doing what any responsible chief executive would do. Verify the risk. Check the vendor chain. Review the gala installation. But the truth sat lower and sharper than that. She was trying to understand why Owen Hale looked at danger like it had already introduced itself to him years ago. Her legal team sent over the temporary event permits, the fire review sign-offs, the drone waiver, and the overnight logistics package. Vivienne skimmed the first pages fast, then slowed. There it was. The decorative mesh above the atrium stage had been substituted 12 days ago for a cheaper imported product to preserve the gala budget after a last-minute design change. Approved through a subcontractor buried under 3 layers of procurement. The smoke control simulation had also been signed off without a closed-roof stress run. Everything about it looked technically compliant if you only read the summary page, which was exactly how weak people protected expensive mistakes. At 8:37, she called facilities, operations, and events into conference room B. No assistance. No small talk. She asked who had reviewed Owen Hale's warning. A young operations manager shifted in his chair and said the note had not come through the normal chain. Vivienne slid the printed report across the table. He filed it at 1:13 this morning. The man glanced at it and shrugged in the polished, careless way only certain kinds of professionals could manage. He is janitorial staff, he said. Sometimes they misread things and escalate because they want to feel included. The sentence settled over the room like dust. Vivienne did not raise her voice. And sometimes, she said, they are the only ones still looking at the building after the rest of you went home. No one answered. She ordered a full atrium review before noon, a live systems test under sealed roof conditions, and immediate confirmation on every material used over the gala footprint. She should have stopped there. She should have stayed inside the clean perimeter of corporate risk. Instead, she called her head of private intelligence and asked for something she had never requested about an employee before. I want everything on Owen Hale, she said. Not rumors. Facts. Full timeline. Start with the year Daniel died. There was a pause on the line before the answer came. Understood. Vivienne hung up and stared out at the Hudson, bright under the morning sun, cold as brushed steel. At 9:14, her phone lit again. Not from the office. From an unknown number. A single image came through with no message attached. It showed a child's hand holding a scorched sliver of metal beside a woman's wedding ring in a velvet box. On the metal, almost burned away, 2 initials were still visible. DC Vivienne felt the air leave her lungs in one slow, silent pull. Only 3 people on Earth should have recognized those initials on that fragment. Daniel, herself, and whoever had carried that piece of the past into a janitor's life and kept it there long enough for a little girl named Sadie to find it. At 9:26 a.m., Vivienne Cross did something she almost never did with a mystery. She stepped away from her desk instead of trying to solve it from behind glass. She took the service elevator down again, crossed the freight corridor, and found Owen Hale in the mechanical room beside the atrium blueprint wall, replacing a pressure gauge with the same calm precision he seemed to bring to everything that should have rattled him. The room was cool, full of steel pipes, humming valves, and the faint smell of dust warming on metal. Owen looked up once, saw her face, and set the gauge down before she said a word. He already knew this was no longer about a maintenance note. Vivienne held up her phone, the image of the scorched metal still on the screen. Why does my dead husband's name exist in your daughter's keepsake box? She asked. Owen did not answer right away. He reached for the wrench on the shelf, set it aside again, then rested both hands on the edge of the workbench like a man, making sure he did not break faith with something bigger than himself. Because I kept what was left, he said. Vivienne felt anger rise first, clean and immediate, because anger was easier than the other feeling pushing underneath it. That is not an explanation. No, Owen said. It is not. Outside the mechanical room door, a forklift rolled past, and the warning beep echoed down the corridor in slow, measured pulses. Inside, nothing moved. Then Owen looked at her fully, and when he spoke again, the careful distance he had held until now was gone. The night Daniel died, I was not on that roof by accident, he said. I was there because I had already flagged a fuel line issue on one of the support aircraft 6 days earlier and got told to stay in my lane. Same words, different building. Vivienne stared at him. You knew him. Only for about 4 minutes. The sentence landed harder than if he had said years. Owen's voice stayed level, but every word sounded chosen against an old cost. His helicopter came down hard enough that most people ran toward noise and flames and confusion. I ran toward the one voice still giving instructions. Vivienne's throat tightened. Daniel had always become more himself in crisis, not less. Owen continued before she could stop him. He knew he did not have much time. He asked my name, asked if I had a family, asked if I was the one who filed the maintenance complaint nobody listened to. Then he looked straight at me and said if a company ever started ignoring the people closest to the danger, it would begin to rot from the inside. Vivienne could barely breathe now. And he told you to whisper that to me? Owen shook his head once. No. He told me something worse. He said if the day ever came when your world got so polished that it could not hear the truth unless it came wrapped in a shock, then I was supposed to find a way to make you stop and listen. Vivienne looked at the pipes, the blueprint wall, the cheap fluorescent lights. Anywhere but his face. And the metal? She asked quietly. Owen glanced down. It was caught in the seam of my jacket when I got home. I should have turned it over. I know that. But my wife had already died by then. My daughter was a baby. I kept too many things that felt like unfinished promises. Then he met her eyes again, and this time there was no softness in him at all, only warning. You can hate me for that later. Right now you need to shut down the gala build. Because the same kind of people who ignored Daniel are still signing off on your air, your materials, and your exits. By 9:58 a.m., the entire executive side of Cross Meridian was moving faster than usual, but not because anyone understood the danger. They were moving because Vivienne Cross had canceled 2 investor calls, postponed a press rehearsal, and ordered a live atrium systems review before lunch. In her world, that alone was enough to make people nervous. In Owen Hale's world, nervous people were often the last ones to admit anything was wrong. He stood beside the sealed roof simulation panel on the service level while engineers, event managers, and outside consultants gathered behind the glass with tablets and careful expressions. Vivienne watched from the front rail, arms folded, face unreadable, but Owen could feel the building already telling its truth. Air moved differently when too many shortcuts had been signed off by people who never stayed long enough to hear what the ducts were trying to say. The first test began clean. Intake fans up. Stage lights warm. Decorative mesh overhead perfectly still. Then the roof seals engaged, and within seconds the numbers bent the wrong way. Heat began collecting above the truss. The extraction path slowed. One consultant frowned at his screen and said it was probably a sensor lag. Owen did not even look at him. Run the drone ignition simulation, he said. The room hesitated. Vivienne gave one sharp nod. They ran it. A small burst of test output hit the sealed volume, and the airflow map bloomed red in exactly the same corner Owen had marked by hand on his clipboard. Silence rolled across the catwalk. It was the expensive kind of silence, the one filled with people calculating blame before responsibility. Vivienne turned to the head of events. You signed off on this. He started explaining procurement layers, subcontractor substitutions, conditional approvals, and temporary use classifications, every polished word designed to spread guilt so thin that no one had to carry it. Vivienne cut him off. Did you sign it? He swallowed. Yes. Owen said nothing. He did not need to. The screen behind them had already become his witness. Then Vivienne's private intelligence chief called. She stepped away to answer, but Owen saw the shift in her face before she returned. Not fear. Recognition. The kind that came when 2 separate tragedies suddenly shared the same architecture. She stopped in front of him, lowered her voice, and said, the supplier behind this mesh was tied through a shell chain to the hotel materials inquiry from the fire where your wife died. For the first time that morning, Owen's control slipped just enough for grief to show through, thin and cold as winter light. He looked back at the red bloom on the airflow model and gave the smallest nod. That is why I knew the pattern, he said. Bad systems do not repeat by accident. They repeat because someone profits from calling them acceptable. Vivienne stared at him as if the man she had tested in a limo the night before had just stepped out of a much older promise than either of them could still control. Then she did the one thing no one in the room expected. She picked up the gala binder, closed it, and said, shut it all down. By 10:40 a.m., shutting the gala down should have ended the danger. In a rational building, it would have. But Cross Meridian was no longer dealing with a technical problem. It was dealing with the kind of problem that smiled in boardrooms, signed waivers with expensive pens, and treated delay like a bigger threat than disaster. Vivienne Cross had barely reached her office before 3 board members, 2 outside counsel, and her chief of staff were waiting for her with the same polished look powerful people wore when they planned to call recklessness by the name of leadership. They argued the test had been preliminary. They argued the vendor chain was insulated. They argued that canceling the gala hours before final media setup would trigger litigation, market panic, and a brutal loss of confidence. Vivienne listened without blinking. Then she said, "The atrium remains closed." Her chief of staff stepped in carefully, almost gently. "Vivienne, perception matters. We can reroute the event footprint, isolate the demonstration, and keep the commitment alive." She turned to him. "You mean keep the appearance alive?" He did not deny it. That was when Owen understood the real structure he was up against. Not steel, not vents, not mesh. A culture built to keep motion going long after truth had raised its hand. He should have gone back downstairs. He should have stayed invisible. Instead, he spoke from the edge of the room, still in a maintenance jacket, still carrying a clipboard that looked almost offensive against all that polished walnut and glass. "If you keep contractors in the atrium while your shutdown is being debated, you still have exposure," he said. One of the board members actually looked irritated that he had a voice. "This is not your meeting." Owen met the man's stare without heat. The smoke path does not care whose meeting it is. The room went still. Vivienne did not smile, but something in her expression shifted toward him, just once, like trust moving before permission. Then her phone rang. It was the school. Sadie had not gone home with the music program because a family member had arrived early demanding to take her. Owen's jaw tightened at once. "Who?" he asked. Vivienne already knew from the look on his face that there was only one answer that mattered. Sadie's maternal grandfather. The same man who had spent years calling Owen decent but unstable, loving but insufficient, present but never enough to erase the fact that he worked nights and carried too much silence around a child. Owen took the call in the hallway. He spoke softly, but every word had edges now. By the time he came back, his face was composed again in that controlled, careful way grief often taught people. "They told the school I was tied to a corporate safety incident," he said. "They are asking for emergency review on custody terms." Vivienne stared at him, and for the first time since the limo, she saw not just the man who had kept a promise to Daniel, not just the janitor who could read danger faster than executives could read liability, but a father being dragged into a second battlefield he had not chosen. And that was when the fire alarm chirped once. Overhead. Just once. Not a full emergency signal. Only a system pulse. Owen looked up immediately. "That should not have happened," he said. Then he turned toward the atrium doors with the kind of focus that made everyone else in the corridor seem 1 second slower than they could afford to be. Owen Hale was already moving before the second system pulse sounded. Not running. Not panicking. Just moving with that same stripped-down certainty Vivienne had started to recognize as the opposite of fear. He crossed the corridor, hit the service stair door, and took the stairs down toward the atrium level 2 at a pace that forced everyone else to choose between trusting him or being left behind by him. Vivienne chose to follow. By the time they reached the mezzanine rail, the problem had revealed itself in the way real problems usually did, not with spectacle, but with a pattern no one had expected to become real this fast. The roof seal had partially re-engaged during the shutdown sequence. A contractor lift still sat near the lighting truss. Temporary fabric dressing over the east display line had begun to curl under trapped heat, and the upper air was moving the wrong way, slowly, invisibly, exactly as Owen had warned. Below them, a handful of contractors were still clearing cases, and 2 young scholarship musicians from the Gala Youth Ensemble had been brought back in through the wrong side corridor to retrieve instrument bags. Vivienne felt her stomach drop. "Why are there still kids in the footprint?" she demanded. No one answered quickly enough. Owen was already studying the room. "Do not trigger a full rush evacuation through the East Service Hall," he said. "That corridor narrows under the temporary floral wall, and it will bottleneck." His voice was calm, but it carried. People listened because he sounded like the building had already told him what it planned to do next. He grabbed a radio from the wall cradle and spoke into it with crisp, measured instructions. "Open west loading access. Kill decorative power. Unlock mezzanine cross doors. Move everyone low and slow. No one goes for personal items. Then he looked at Vivienne. Where is Sadie? The question hit her like ice. She turned to her assistant, who had just reached the rail, pale and breathless. She was with the youth group check-in 10 minutes ago, the woman said. Owen's face did not change, but the stillness in him tightened into something deeper than urgency. He took one step toward the east corridor, then stopped and looked up at the air, listening the way other men might listen for a human voice. She will follow my pattern if she hears it, he said. Vivienne did not understand until he knocked twice against the steel handrail, paused, then knocked once more. The sound was simple, dull, ordinary. A father's code hidden inside industrial noise. He did it again. Somewhere below, faint through the corridor bend, a child knocked back. One beat, then two. Owen closed his eyes for half a second, not in relief, not yet, but in confirmation. She is alive and west of the atrium, he said. Vivienne had never seen anything so intimate and so devastating happen in the middle of a corporate emergency. Not because it was dramatic, because it was practiced. Because this was not the first time Owen Hale had taught a child how to answer danger without seeing him. He handed Vivienne the radio. Keep the west path clear, he said. If anybody from your board tries to reopen that east corridor to save equipment, stop them. Then he headed for the service passage beside the display wall, not like a janitor, not like an employee beneath notice, but like the one man in the building who had been telling the truth since 1:13 in the morning. When Owen disappeared into the west service passage, time inside Cross Meridian changed shape. Minutes stopped feeling like minutes. They felt like choices made too late. Vivienne Cross stood at the rail with the radio in one hand and the whole polished weight of her company pressing down on the other. Below her, the atrium lights had been cut, the decorative screens hung still and useless, and the last of the trapped heat drifted upward in thin, wavering layers that made the air look uncertain. Then the west corridor door opened and Owen came through with Sadie first, one hand on her shoulder, guiding two scholarship musicians and a shaken contractor behind her in a straight, controlled line that looked less like panic and more like practice. Sadie's violin case was gone. Her small blue sweater was streaked with dust. But she was walking. Vivienne did not realize she had been holding her breath. Until the child looked up and saw her father and did not cry. She only said, very softly, I remembered the knock. Owen bent to her level, checked her face, her hands, her breathing, the way only a parent who had lived too close to loss ever learned to do, and then nodded once like she had just passed the most important test in the world. Around them, executives began talking all at once. Legal exposure, vendor liability, press containment, board response. One of the directors was already asking whether the incident could be classified as a limited systems malfunction if no one used the word negligence. Vivienne turned and looked at those men as if she had never truly seen them before. Then her phone lit up with two messages at the exact same time. The first was from outside counsel. If you release Daniel's sealed statement, the merger is dead, the board may remove you, and the company could fracture. The second was from Owen's lawyer. Sadie's grandparents have filed for emergency review, citing unsafe work environment and concealed trauma history. Vivienne stared at both screens, then at Owen, who was standing in the middle of the atrium his warning should have saved hours ago, holding his daughter close without asking anything from anyone. That was the cruel center of it. If she told the full truth, she might save future lives and destroy his chance to keep his child. If she protected him, she might become the next person who chose silence over consequence. Owen met her eyes across the distance, and for the first time all day, neither of them looked away. Outside, snow had started falling over Manhattan in thin white lines, soft enough to look harmless, cold enough to change a night. Sadie tugged lightly at her father's sleeve and asked the question no boardroom could answer for them. Dad, if telling the truth takes me away from you, are we still supposed to tell it? And standing there with Daniel's old promise on one side and a living child on the other, Vivienne understood that the real decision had not even begun. So what should come first now? The truth that could save a company, or the silence that might save a family?